Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Today's show will feature our guest, New York Dore. We will talk some Vanderbilt baseball. This episode sponsored by the Well Coffee House, which is a Nashville area coffee house that provides fresh roasted coffee along with its house-made pastries, breakfast, and lunch offerings. There are 5 locations to serve you in the Nashville area. Those are located in Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, Bellevue, and in the Cool Springs Lifeway. More information can be found at the Well Coffee House. That's wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Our news today, presented by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in any type of accident, call Taylor or Russell. That number, 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Vanderbilt snaps a 2-game losing streak on Tuesday night in baseball. It defeats Belmont 3-0 at First Tennessee Park. Mason Hickman, the winning pitcher, he struck out a career-high 12 for the Commodores, who were 16-5 and play Florida in a 3-game series starting Thursday night at Hawkins Field. New York Dore joins us now. My friend, since we last talked, Vanderbilt has lost a series to Texas A&M on the road, a tough place to play against a tough team, but some things there I think we both didn't like. Rebounded with a nice win over Belmont on Tuesday at First Tennessee Park. Some good things to take from that, I think. Anyway, since we last talked, kind of what's your take on Vanderbilt baseball, A, and B, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely happy to be here. I think when we look at the Texas A&M weekend, and we'll get to the midweek game last week as well. But when we look at the Texas A&M weekend, if you had told me that Vanderbilt would beat Duxakis and Lacey and somehow manage to lose the series, that's probably the one outcome I wouldn't have expected. And through the 7th inning stretch on Saturday, I think Vanderbilt was having a fantastic weekend. And I note that the 7th inning stretch is when I actually had to leave and go and stop watching the game. So clearly it's all because of me. But, the only real fault you had in the first, say, 16 innings on Friday and Saturday was a little bit of sloppy defense and Drake Fellows not being able to throw strikes. But, as we've said repeatedly in the past, Drake sometimes has issues, particularly compartmentalized into an inning or two, usually either early in the game or late in the game. And he tends to be able to battle through them if he doesn't get hit up and touched up too much. And that's exactly what we saw on Friday, which was Drake couldn't throw a strike early, gutted it out. I give some credit to Corbs and to Brownie. I think when Drake's losing it early, and particularly when you don't have the availability of someone like Mason Hickman, you try and let him ride it through something like that. It's very different than when Drake loses it late in the 5th or 6th inning, and you've got to try and go in and get him as quick as possible because the wheels might fall off, and historically that tends to be what's happened with him when he has those issues late versus when he has those issues early. But other than that, Drake really battled back, ended up giving us, I can't recall if it was 5 or 6 innings solid. I wouldn't say he pitched better than Duxakis, but he outpitched him. And, Pat Raby was outstanding, other than having difficulty keeping his pitch count down, which was in part due to a guy having an 11-pitch walk in the first inning. It's one guy who gave him fits all night, or all day, I should say, in that TAMU lineup. I think it was Baum. But he was fantastic again, lowered his ERA again. And Vanderbilt was doing great. I mean, if you look at the at-bats that Vanderbilt had against Duxakis and Lacey, particularly the left-handed hitters, it was really, really fun to watch against 2 of the best pitchers in the country and guys who, from a technical basis, should be giving Vanderbilt's lefty bats fits. And they look they looked great. They weren't knocking the cover off the ball, but they were having highly competitive at bats and put up a number of runs on both of those two star pitchers. And it's really a shame that they didn't get the series win because of everything that happened basically, after Raby left the game, which was, again, a collapse with issues with strike throwing. I didn't see it, but I understand there was an aggressive play, where DeMarco tried to make a diving catch that would have saved the game. Came up a little short, ended up being a bases clearing triple that allowed the game to be tied. And, a lot went wrong. And then the Sunday game, really, there was one positive in the Sunday game, which, notwithstanding the fact that he gave up a 4 spot at one point with 2 unearned runs, I thought Kumar Rocker actually looked very good, very composed, very under control. And as I commented on Twitter, I think the thing that really impresses me about him is this is also a kid who's transformed his body in 6 months. And that's an important thing to note and a positive sign for what to expect in the future from him. I think, if he continues on this pace, he's going to be a real physical specimen. No Walker Grisanti, but a real physical specimen. Not a lot good, though, happened other than that, really. And Steven Scott had himself a nice day on Sunday. Also had himself a nice day yesterday, providing basically the bulk of the offense, scoring all 3 Vanderbilt runs. I think at one point, I had tracked going into the 9th inning yesterday that it was something like Scott over the last 2 games had been 5 of 7 with a homer and a walk, and the rest of the team was something like 5 of 58 or something along those lines. So Scotty really doing the heavy lifting for the offense over the last 2 games, and unfortunately that meant there was really just 3 runs scored. But I know that's a lot to unpack. But my takeaway from the weekend was we were, maybe a couple inches on a Pat DeMarco dive from walking away with a road series win against a top 25 team while facing possibly the 2 toughest 1-2 punch pitching matchup we'd have to face all year. Even with an ugly Sunday game, I would have been thrilled with that. But it's amazing what one play can do to turn a weekend around.
New York Dore, we've got a limited time window this morning. I'm just going to go straight to the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan Josh Minton, an independent insurance agent operating out of Brentwood, looking for a one-stop shop to take care of your insurance needs. Josh has you covered. Call him today, 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Twitter at Joshua Minton HQ, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Joshua Minton, JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. Give him a try. I think you'll be glad that you do. Tell him you heard about him here. This one from KC Dore. Does Scott Brown force pitchers to throw certain pitches even if they are marginal or with them or clearly missing in an outing? Why not pound the strike zone and see what happens?
So, I would almost ask whether or not they were reading my Twitter feed on Friday. Yes, Scott Brown calls the pitches. I'm not going to go into criticism and analysis of how he calls games because I do think that he knows more in his little pinky about pitching than I know in my whole body. That said, when a kid clearly can't locate a pitch, as was the case with Drake and the slider early on Friday, I come back to why are you throwing it? If you consistently have failure and an inability to throw strikes in a demonstrable way over an extended period, which we've had with probably about, I'd say this year probably about 12 instances of a pitcher just completely and utterly losing the strike zone. Drake wasn't within feet of his target with his slider in the first inning and the first half of the second inning on Friday. And yet it was still being thrown in 1-0 counts and whatnot. When you're struggling to throw strikes, yes, you don't want to just say, here's a fastball down the middle of the plate, because then you're looking at batting practice. But at the same time, you've got to be able to make competitive pitches. And these guys aren't just fastball slider. They have other options. There's also a distinction between a four-seamer and a two-seamer, but you got to be able to get over the plate. And a slider that's bouncing is not a competitive pitch at 1-0. It might be a 2-0, or rather, pardon me, it might be a 0-2, but not at 1-0. And I think, there's Scott Brown is very well paid to be our pitching coach. Tim Corbin, who is the final say, from my understanding, on most of the pitching change moves, is extremely well paid to be our head coach. They are not immune from criticism, and they're also not solely going to get criticism. They're also going to get credit when it's due. But there are a handful of components on strike throwing, and those components include: one, execution, which is principally on the pitcher themselves; two, training, mechanic work, getting yourself in a position where you can repeatedly throw pitches that are going to be high quality. And that's a shared burden between the pitcher and the pitching coach that involves appropriate strategy, analysis, diagnostics, and instruction from the pitching coach, but also putting in the hard work on the part of the pitchers. I'm not aware of any attitude problems and any of our pitchers not being willing to put the work in and take instruction. But we're not in that locker room, and we're not in those sessions in the pitching lab. So I don't want to say one way or another. But clearly, there's a component there also on Scott Brown where we tend not to see improvement on control, with a handful of notable exceptions. Guys like Carson Fulmer, I think they improved their control over the years. Tyler Brown has had, and it's a short sample this year, but a dramatic uptick in his accuracy. So, this is not uniform, but clearly control has been an issue over the last 3 years. The third component is pitch calling and pitch selection. And, that's on the pitching coach. You don't see guys shaking off a pitch at this level, and it's not being called by the catcher. The last catcher who had that duty here at Vanderbilt was Jason DeLay, and that wasn't even full-time. Spencer Navin had that opportunity for quite a while as well. And then the fourth topic, which also obviously has to be addressed, is natural ability. But it's also, we know, the coaching staffs, and on this I bring Baxter in too, and Travis Jewett before him. It's on the coaching staff to assess the natural talent and the ability to harness incredible power. I mean, we've got a number of guys who have, come in with electric high upside and had inherent with that high upside a decent amount of risk that they weren't going to throw strikes. And, one person, again, who I think we actually have to point to as an example of Scott Brown doing a good job so far in a limited amount of time is Kumar Rocker, is the definition of that. A guy with unlimited upside, but a lot of control issues in high school. We saw those control issues in his first outing this spring, but ever since then, he's been very good. And, he's someone you can point to with Scott Brown and say, okay, Kumar's put in a lot of work, but Scott Brown's also done some good stuff with him, and some credit needs to be given there. So, long story short, no, the coaching staff should not be immune from criticism. Yes, criticism is sometimes very well placed. And thirdly, I'd much rather us criticize the coaches than a 19-year-old kid who's trying their hardest and not getting paid. I think if you followed me on Twitter yesterday, I was a little bit caustic over a number of decisions, largely relating to the lineup, and that's part of expectations to win. And the coaching staff is very well paid to handle, criticism.
Let's see. Next one I have here is from Ann Arbor Dore. Does the bullpen warm-up routine allow the pitcher to determine if he's having an on or off day? If so, a pitcher knows he's off. Is there a backup plan?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, particularly given that we've got a number of guys who are prone to having an off day. I don't know the answer to that. I think that, Brownie as bullpen coach sits with the starting pitcher during warmups, and there's some instruction goes on there. There's also some analysis. I think if you talk to most players, they're going to say they're probably not going to, in their warmups, assess a substantial difference in what's working and what's not working, because you don't get to this level without being confident that, a miss in warmups isn't going to be an executed pitch in the game. As far as who's in the bullpen during games, Brownie's not there. There is typically a member of the coaching staff who's going to be in the bullpen, but I'm not sure, that's really a factor in determining who's warming up, who comes in, particularly because I think we've seen a little bit less this year of the small village in the bullpen with multiple arms warming up. So it tends to have seemed to be more of a thoughtful process on the part of Corbs as to how he wants to transition from pitcher to pitcher.
Okay, this one from Superior. I liked Mason Hickman as a Sunday starter. Is that a better option to do that and move Kumar Rocker to middle reliever? And that question was asked before his Tuesday start against Belmont, which was very, very impressive.
Yeah, so I'm as big a Mason Hickman fan as you'll find in this fan base. I've been singing his praises for a year and a half. I think he'd be an outstanding Sunday starter. I think he's. I would like to say that he's somewhat wasted being a midweek starter, although we saw last year the importance of getting these wins, and his performance last night reflects the fact that he's the kind of guy who can come in here and get us that check mark on a Tuesday or Wednesday without having to worry about it, and that's not an unimportant thing. Yesterday was the type of game where we weren't putting up anything on offense in some cases, despite really playing some murder ball and having balls fall short at the wall. We didn't really get much of anything going at all yesterday. 3 runs, all via Steven Scott. And, you have to wonder if Mason's not on his game, does Belmont find a way to sneak out a win? And that can be pretty devastating to a resume. So I think we need a solution that's going to work on midweek. And the fact that the pitching staff is not as deep as we would have hoped, at least within the circle of trust, is an issue. As far as Sundays, listen, if I could rewrite this season, yeah, I'd almost certainly have Mason in on Sunday, and Kumar, who I note again, I have tremendous confidence in, available to go through a lineup, once on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday. We do not have a pitching staff where guys are going to throw complete games this year. We just don't. It's possible Drake. I think Drake's had 1 complete game in his career. I would guess Pat Raby's probably had maybe 3 or 4. But these are guys who throw a lot of pitches, and we're going to need key relievers. So my guess is what we'll see with Mason at this point is, 3 innings or 4 innings on a Tuesday, and then turning him around and having him close out a Saturday with a couple innings there, and likely see Kumar stick on on Sundays. We're not going to see a transition on a short week where Mason's thrown 95 pitches or so over 6 innings. He's not going to get turned around and start a game on Saturday, because this is a short week where we're facing Florida starting tomorrow, Thursday, and wrapping up the series on Saturday. It will be interesting to see whether or not, if in part depending on how Kumar does on this Saturday. Again, I thought he had a pretty good outing, notwithstanding the result on Sunday at Bluebell. But I think we've sort of made our bed, and I don't think Mason's going to be the Sunday guy, at least for a couple of weeks, if at all.
Next one from Hardcore Dore. Infield defense was a problem this past weekend. Is Austin Martin suited for an outfield slot? If so, how would that affect the overall lineup, and what would be the best infield lineup?
So this has been the dilemma. We discussed it in the podcast leading up to the season. The biggest weakness I saw on this team was infield defense. The solution, which you hope works, is Julian at first. In that, Julian at first solves a lot of the issues we have with throwing, which is, not probably the principal problem we have on defense. Our issues on defense are more about knowing where to be, knowing how to react, knowing how to glove, knowing how to cover, things like that, more so than throwing issues. But Julian will solve some problems in that he has a much larger wingspan than Scotty, more height than Scotty, and softer arms and better familiarity with how to approach the bag at first. So I think Julian will save some errors, save some runs on defense. The question is, what are you going to get from him on offense? I know the numbers haven't been great this year, but it isn't looking, and Julian doesn't look as lost at the plate as he did last year. He's hit the ball hard a handful of times and, got sidelined by a concussion. I'd like to see him have an opportunity to work out of it a little bit. Facing Texakis and Lacey this weekend wasn't really fair on many people. Those are two real premium arms. But if we can get Julian into the lineup because his bat justifies it, that strengthens the defense. If Julian's at first, though, you got to put Steven Scott somewhere. And if Steven Scott is on a lineup with Austin Martin and JJ Bleday in it, I'm not fully convinced that Steven Scott won't have the most productive offensive year on this team, and that says something. So, Steven Scott's got to be somewhere, and that somewhere is going to be left field, DH, first base, catcher, or possibly second base, and we'll come back to that in a second. Second base, Harrison Ray's been up and down at the plate, up and down on defense, made a couple of really nice plays on the Tuesday game versus Belmont, made a couple of boneheaded plays that didn't cost us on Sunday or Saturday. I can't remember which day it was. He's a work in progress at second, but he's been better there than Austin was. I continue to state that Ethan Paul's been actually a pleasant surprise defensively at shortstop. He's really done a lot better than I'd expected. So I'm pretty okay and happy with him there. He's not Connor Kaiser, but no one's Connor Kaiser. And then we have Austin Martin. And, is Austin Martin the answer at third? No. Is he the answer at short? No. Is the answer at second? No. Does he have to be in the lineup somewhere? Yes. And, where could that lineup be? It's either going to be second, third, first, left, or DH. We're not taking Phil Clark and Steven Scott out of the lineup, so we know one of them is going to be, a catcher or DH. One of them is going to be at first or DH. There's some metric of getting them into the lineup. So there really isn't a good solution, and I don't think you want to push them out to the outfield, because I think Cooper Davis does a lot for this club, and Pat DeMarco and JJ Bleday are going to be in this lineup no matter what, notwithstanding DeMarco being out of the lineup yesterday, supposedly due to being a little banged up. Both he and Davis sat yesterday. with Kiambu playing center and Stephen Scott in left. So it remains to be seen how you address it, but the answer is it's all a trade-off. If you want better defense, you're going to be subbing out someone. The issue is there's no one who's going to provide better defense at shortstop than Ethan Paul. So period, point blank, stop there. He's our shortstop unless he gets injured. At second base, what's the other option? One potential option we could look at, and it allows us to get a stronger bat in the lineup potentially, is that Stephen Scott took some reps at second base in the fall. I don't know, how good those reps were, but if we're really continuing to struggle on defense, is it something that Corbs looks at down the line? Does Jason Gonzalez get a harder look at third? And if Jason does get a harder look at third, then Austin Martin's going to have to be somewhere other than third. Jason's defense, frankly, has some of the same issues as Austin and Harry, although Jason has probably seen some strong year-over-year improvement in his defensive approach. So the short answer is we knew this was going to be a big conundrum. The actual defense, the skill set of our players this year is, particularly on the infield, is dramatically lower than I think it's been in any era that I can recall during Tim Corbin's time here. So it's something we have to live with, and it's a trade-off. Those players we're running out there have different skill sets, and those skill sets are pretty darn good. It just makes it at times a little difficult to watch. The other thing I'd note, shouldn't be lost on people. We had a little bit of a rough defensive weekend in Bluebell. This was the first time away from the Hawk in a while. And at least one play I can recall, there was a really hard ground ball that Harry Ray took off the chest in the Friday game where, you can attribute that to A, a bad hop, and B, a ball being absolutely clobbered right at him. And, sometimes that's going to happen. And one of the nice parts about our turf defense is the bounces are more consistent. But when you go and you head to a natural grass facility, you might have to deal with some uncertainties that you're not necessarily as accustomed to.
Okay, last listener question comes from 14er Dore. Is Trey Fletcher truly reclassifying to 2019? That has to dramatically increase the odds of getting him to campus, right?
I doubt it, to be frank. So, yes, Trey Fletcher is up Portland, New Hampshire, hometown of the Flaherty boys, Ryan and help me out, I'm forgetting Ryan's brother's name.
Oh, thanks a lot. Now I have two. Regan.
Yeah, Regan. So Ryan and Regan Flaherty. Ryan, of course, Flash with the Orioles, and now with who is he with now?
I'm not sure he's with anybody. The Braves did not re-sign him, and I've not seen where he landed or didn't land.
I do think he landed somewhere, not for $430 million, but I do think he landed somewhere. Portland, Maine, New Hampshire, Portland, Maine, excuse me.
Maine is where the Flahertys are from. So New Hampshire.
And you're right. Actually, he is from New Hampshire. So, strike everything I said. But, from Trey Fletcher's from New Hampshire, I believe. So he went to, I want to say he goes to Deering High School. I could be wrong on that. Local up there, big school in his hometown. He had gone to Trinity Pauling, which I think is in Westchester, New York, a prep school. And when he did that, he repeated his freshman year of high school. So he competed as a freshman in high school at his local public school, transferred to Trinity Pauling, and repeated his freshman year. He is returning to his high school and reclassifying to join his original class. So he's going to be a senior along with all of the other seniors that he was freshman with. he was going to be old if he had stayed in the 2020 class. He was the number one overall player. You look at him and you say, this kid's a high school junior, because he's just got a level of physicality about the look of him that really is impressive, and a skill set that is really pronounced. I think if you look at his batting metrics in particular, they're all like in the top 0.2% of perfect games database for his class year, and that would be bat velocity, exit velocity, stuff like that. He's got an arm that throws 93 miles an hour. He's just a tremendous physical specimen. And, would you put him on par with Bobby Witt Jr. from a performance perspective? I don't know that I'd go that far, but you'd be hard pressed to find someone with more physicality than he does. So, number one overall prospect, class of 2020, transitions into being a top 10 overall prospect or top 15 overall prospect for the class of 2019. Do I think it dramatically increases his chance of getting to campus? No. Do I think it dramatically increases the chance of perhaps other prospects getting to campus? Might. One more guy who's going to draw a $3 million check might be the difference in someone having the money to throw at a different person who would need to be overslotted. So I don't know, but it's adding to another extraordinarily stacked recruiting class for 2019. I don't know that there is anyone who I would take a look at and say, okay, they're definitely going pro. The highest regarded player other than Trey in this draft class is going to be Jack Leiter, who's a top 15-ish type pick. I don't think that. I think there's a very good chance of him getting to campus. Someone who you might look at and say, okay, Trey Fletcher is going to push this guy down another spot in everyone's pecking order, is a guy like Spencer Jones, who is himself a freak athlete. 6'7" guy, can touch the mid 90s on the mound as a lefty, can hit straight bombs as a first baseman or a left fielder. He's going to be someone interesting. And do I think that Trey Fletcher moving to 2019 helps Vanderbilt's draft class? I'm going to say yes, but only very marginally, in that it slightly increases the odds that we get someone we have no business getting through the draft through, because there's more of them now. And two, that if Trey Fletcher gets taken, he's going to be taken for a lot of money, and that money means there's a little bit less for some of the other Vanderbilt guys who typically have to take. It's going to take a larger check to sign a Vanderbilt guy than some of the others, some of the other schools, recruits, I should say. But it's going to be interesting. The outfielder in the 2020 class, who I still think we all want to watch, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not we have a shot at getting him through, is a guy by the name of Pete Crow Armstrong, who's out of California. His parents are both actors who actually met on the series, on the set of Heroes. And his mom was the mom in Little Big League, the old, I guess it was 90s movie about the kid who inherits the Minnesota Twins. And Pete was ranked, I think, 4th in the class of 2020, with Trey ranked number 1. So presumably Pete moves up to the number 3 ranked player. And he's just an all-around stud on the mound, on the outfield. Center fielder, played as a junior on the USA under-18 team this past summer, and is just this past fall, and it's just stand out all around. And if you're looking for a priority of a kid who you'd really love to see get to campus, I think Pete would be the type of guy who's a real difference maker from day one.
Okay, I figured out the confusion. He is indeed from from Portland, Maine. He was at, I guess it's pronounced Cheverus High School, and apparently transferred sometime in the middle of February or maybe early March. Sounds like February to Deering, so that's very unusual. You do hear it happening every now and then, so I think that accounts for why the confusion on where he is at the moment. But yes, he is reclassifying, so that's the situation on Trey Fletcher.
And he is in Maine, not New Hampshire.
Correct. Hey, New York.
Yep.
I was going to say, I know you're out of time, so I was going to go ahead and let you go. Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to catching up with you again next week.
And who do we play this weekend?
Some team from the East. Maybe far, a little south, Florida. Maybe is that it?
Yeah, 2 straight weekends with probably the worst, most miserable SOBs walking into the Hawk. Well, I guess we're going to Knoxville, aren't we?
No, that's in Nashville. Both in Nashville,
okay.
back to back.
Back-to-back rivalry week games. Just very quickly, both of those 2 rivals took it on the chin this weekend. Mississippi State went down to Gainesville and took 2 out of 3. Or did they sweep? I actually am not sure.
But, I think they swept.
So they swept, and it was really a dramatic weekend for the SEC West. I think they went 12-3 against the SEC East, with those wins including Vanderbilt and I think just 2 others with single wins out of 5 series. The Auburn just took it to Tennessee and swept them this weekend, and Mississippi State with a real statement win, and Mississippi State has leapt up to number 2 in the overall rankings behind UCLA. I haven't looked at all the polls. I think that's the D1 poll, or the coaches poll may also match that. And I think Vanderbilt dropped to around 6th or 7th in most of the polls, which is about, that to be honest, the way we've played that might actually be a little generous, because the only thing that I would classify right now at this point as a top 2 or 3 type of component on the team is the lineup. The defense is, we hide a somewhat shaky defense under a very high fielding percentage, and our walk rates right now are just, astoundingly through the roof. So, it remains to be seen, and these next 2 weekends are going to be really interesting, particularly this weekend against Florida, where we face an offense that up until this past weekend had just been absolutely lights out hot. It's going to be fun to see.
That's New York Dore. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you again next week.